Welcome, weary traveler. Tonight, let your mind drift back through the mists of time to the cold, rugged shores of the north, where the Vikings once lit their funeral pyres and whispered farewell to their bravest souls. Before you fall to sleep, please like and subscribe if you truly enjoy what I am doing here. Your support keeps these ancient stories alive, carried on the wind like old Norse songs. Now, rest your eyes and listen closely as we begin a quiet journey alongside a mighty chieftain whose spirit is ready to sail beyond the horizon to the golden halls of Valhalla, where heroes feast forever. Let the gentle crackle of torches and the soft lapping of waves guide you deeper into this night. And if sleep comes for you before the tale is done, know you're safe here among old legends and endless stars. In a small village nestled between towering mountains and the restless sea, an old Viking chieftain lies still beneath a roof of carved beams and drifting smoke. Outside, winter's breath curls through the fjord, whispering through pine and drifting over frozen ground. Inside, the longhouse glows with the soft light of the hearth, flames licking gently at split logs stacked high to keep the cold at bay. The chieftain's people gather close, sons, daughters, grandchildren, warriors he once led across stormy seas, friends who grew gray and bent beside him. They speak in hushed voices, words swallowed by the crackle of the fire and the low sigh of the wind pressing at the timber walls. He was once fierce, his roar carried above battlefields and across the open sea. Now his breath has slowed, quiet as snow settling on the earth. His eyes are closed, but his spirit stirs on the edge of a final voyage, ready to drift from flesh and bone to the realm beyond. At his bedside sits his eldest son. He remembers when his father's hair was thick and golden like a harvest field, his laughter booming across feast halls crowded with roaring men and singing skalds. He remembers how that strong hand rested on his shoulder when he first lifted a sword, how that same voice spoke of honor and kin, of raids and storms and the price of glory. All around, the family places tokens of memory beside him. A simple iron axe, half-worn smooth by decades of grip. A carved wooden idol of Odin, its single eye watching through the shadows. A strip of fur from a bear he slew in his youth, when his name first spread among the fjords like fire on dry grass. Each item whispers of a life once bold and bright, now slipping gently toward the waiting halls of the gods. Outside, a cold wind rises, rattling the thatched roof, reminding those within that even the strongest man bends to time. Yet there is no fear in this place tonight, only a quiet reverence, a calm acceptance that this is the way of all things, birth and battle, feast and fire, love and loss. All paths lead at last to the same shore. An old seer sits cross-legged near the hearth, muttering soft prayers that drift like smoke toward the beams overhead. She speaks of the Valkyries, the shining maidens who ride the storm clouds, who lift brave souls from the mortal coil and guide them skyward. Somewhere, she says, they wait just beyond the storm, their horses stamping at the edge of the world. The villagers sit through the night. They do not leave him alone. To leave him alone now would be to deny the bond that made them a clan, bound by blood, by oaths, by firelight shared on countless dark nights. They doze and wake again, keeping watch, murmuring stories of his youth, so that his spirit, half dreaming, might smile at the echoes of old laughter. Hours pass. The longhouse grows quiet, but for the flames and the wind. And when dawn's first pale light slides through the narrow gaps in the timber walls, the old chieftain breathes one final time, and then no more. A hush settles across the room. The eldest son bows his head, pressing a rough hand to the cold brow. A single tear falls, not of fear nor regret, but of gratitude for the long years given, for lessons taught in harsh winds and warm mead halls alike. They do not weep long. The people stand and step out into the crisp morning where snow drifts softly between the trees. Already word spreads. The chieftain has begun his journey to Valhalla. Soon the clan will gather wood, oil, cloth, and silver. They will build the ship that will carry him beyond the horizon. They will whisper final farewells, light the flames, and send him sailing to join the ancestors who wait with open arms beneath the shimmering roof of the gods. But for now they stand together, breath rising in the dawn, bound by the quiet promise that he will not be forgotten. In his passing they remember their own place in the great circle of storms and stars, and somewhere far above in the endless sky, the Valkyries stir their wings, ready to guide him home. As dawn slowly brightens the frost-kissed sky, word spreads swiftly through the village and far beyond the towering fjords. The chieftain's passing has reached the ears of kin and clansmen alike, carried by the swift runners and whispering winds to distant homesteads scattered along rocky shores and deep forest valleys. The clan begins to stir, awoken not only by the soft glow of morning but by the deep call of honor and tradition that ties them to their fallen leader. It is a summons no true Viking can ignore, the duty to stand together, to honor the life that shaped them all, and to guide the spirit toward its final resting place. Families begin to prepare, moving quietly through their homes and long houses with measured care. Leather boots are laced, cloaks fastened against the chill, and small bundles packed, not for a journey of battle this time, but for a solemn pilgrimage. Fathers help their children don soft furs, mothers tie woolen scarves tight against the morning air. Outside, the fjord lies still, a glass mirror reflecting the pale blue of the awakening sky. Longships rest at their moorings, sleek wooden bodies waiting patiently for the coming voyage. The familiar scent of salt and pine mingles with the earthy aroma of damp stone and frost-bitten earth. From every corner of the surrounding lands, boats begin to appear on the horizon, slowly cutting through the calm waters like dark shadows. They carry family, friends, warriors, and distant cousins, all converging toward this sacred gathering. Some ships bear the colors of distant clans, their shields glinting softly in the early light. Others are simpler, small fishing vessels repurposed for this final voyage. As the boats draw closer to the village's sheltered harbor, the villagers line the shore in quiet rows, their breaths rising in pale clouds. The air hums with the low murmur of greetings, the gentle clinking of armor, and the soft footsteps on wet stones. No banners fly today, no horns sound battle cries. Only the reverent silence of kinship and farewell fills the fjord. The chieftain's eldest son stands at the water's edge, eyes fixed on the approaching vessels. His expression is solemn, a mixture of pride and grief etched deep in the lines of his weathered face. Around him, others share stories, tales of the chieftain's strength, his wisdom in council, his kindness in times of peace, and his courage in war. These memories drift through the air like mist, wrapping the gathering in warmth despite the chill. As each boat comes ashore, the crew disembarks with care, their footsteps soft on the wooden piers. They carry gifts and offerings, woven tapestries dyed in rich reds and blues, carved drinking horns etched with ancient runes, small chests filled with silver coins and precious stones. These tokens are not merely valuables, They are symbols of respect and a means to aid the chieftain's journey to the afterlife. Women move quietly among the gathering, distributing warm drinks made from spiced mead and herbal brews. The scent of honey and wild herbs fills the air, mingling with the sharp tang of the sea. Children, wrapped in thick cloaks, watch with wide eyes, sensing the weight of the moment even if they do not fully understand. Nearby, the village elders begin to prepare the ritual site, a cleared space near the fjord's edge where the funeral ship will be readied. The ground is swept clean of leaves and stones, soft moss laid down in preparation for the chieftain's final resting place. The atmosphere is heavy, yet peaceful, filled with a quiet determination. There is no rush here, only the measured pace of tradition and the careful steps of those who know that this journey is both an end and a beginning. As the sun climbs higher, the clan forms a circle, their voices rising in soft chanting, a hymn to the gods, to the ancestors, and to the brave soul who now journeys beyond mortal bounds. The melody is low and haunting, a gentle rhythm that seems to echo off the surrounding mountains and mingle with the distant cries of seabirds. In this moment, time itself seems to pause, as if the very world holds its breath to honor the passage of a great man. And as the last notes fade into the cold morning air, the clan prepares to turn toward the next sacred task, the crafting and blessing of the funeral ship that will carry their chieftain into legend and eternity. The morning sun filtered through the small window of the longhouse, casting soft beams across the wooden floor. Outside, seabirds called and pine branches swayed, but inside, the family moved in quiet reverence. The death of the chieftain weighed on everyone, a reminder of what was ending and what would come next. Harold, the eldest son, stood beside his father's still form. He traced the lines of his father's weathered hand, feeling the weight of all that must now rest on his own shoulders. Around him, his siblings and their mother moved with care, arranging furs and placing items for the journey ahead. A polished axe, a carved figure of Odin, a drinking horn that once sealed alliances. Each piece told of the chieftain's battles, friendships, and faith. Freya, the clan's seer, whispered old chants, her voice winding through the heavy air. Herbs smoldered in a small bowl, filling the space with a scent meant to guide the spirit beyond. Children peered from the edges of the room, eyes wide and hushed. Astrid, Harold's sister, knelt to calm them, telling tales of their father's courage and kindness, of feasts and battles, of how he once turned enemies into brothers. Outside, warriors built the funeral pyre, stacking pine logs with quiet precision. Smoke drifted from the hearth to the fjord, mingling with the scent of salt and cold wind. Neighbors arrived in longships, bringing gifts, fine cloth, silver-carved weapons. They clasped Harold's hand, nodding solemnly, honoring the man they came to farewell. As the day passed, the clan gathered in a circle. Harold spoke of his father's life, fierce in battle, fair in judgment, loyal to his kin. His words wove a final thread between past and future, each story carrying warmth and sorrow. The seer's voice rose, joined by the clan's quiet hymn, a song of safe passage and proud remembrance. Twilight fell and torches were lit. Warriors lifted the chieftain's body onto the pyre, resting him among the timber and gifts. Harold held the first flame, his hand steady as he touched it to the dry wood. Slowly, fire caught and climbed. Sparks rose into the darkening sky, a bridge from Earth to Valhalla. Around the blaze, the family stood shoulder to shoulder. They watched the flames carry away more than a leader. They carried a legacy that would shape Harold's path and the village's for generations to come. Beneath the vast northern sky, As the pyre burned and shadows flickered across solemn faces, the story of a great Viking ended. Yet in that ending new stories waited, whispered like the wind through pines, a promise that life, like the tide, would keep flowing. Long after the flames had turned to soft embers and the night sky above the fjord shimmered with stars, the village settled into a quiet calm. The air carried the faint scent of pine smoke and salt from the sea, a reminder of the farewell just given. Inside the longhouse, now dimly lit by flickering oil lamps, the family gathered close. No words needed to be spoken, their closeness was enough. Harold sat near the hearth, feeling the gentle warmth seep through his weary body. The low crackle of the fire was steady and comforting. Across from him, Astrid carefully mended a torn cloak, her fingers moving methodically. Now and then, she looked up to meet her brother's eyes, offering a soft smile that said, "We are here, we are together." Outside, the cold wind brushed against the wooden walls, whispering through the gaps. It carried memories of the chieftain's voice, laughter by the fireside, commands barked on stormy shores, gentle songs sung to restless children. Those echoes lingered in the corners of the longhouse, woven into the beams and furs like threads of an unbroken tale. At Harold's feet, two small cousins lay curled up, half asleep, their breathing slow and even. They had cried earlier, small hands clutching at Astrid's cloak, but now sleep had brought peace. Nearby, an old hound lay stretched out, its tail thumping softly in its dreams, keeping watch as it always had. The seer Freya sat close to the wall, her eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayers to guide the chieftain's soul through the 9 realms. Her staff rested across her knees, its runes catching the firelight like tiny constellations. Though her hair was streaked with gray, her presence brought quiet strength to the family, a reminder that what had been lost would find its place in story and memory. Time drifted slowly, like snow falling into a still fjord. No one felt the need to rush. The clan's warriors would stand guard until dawn, tending the last embers of the pyre outside, while inside, the family remained wrapped in the warmth of each other's company. Harold's thoughts wandered to the days ahead, to the weight of his new role, to the many choices that would shape his people's future. But tonight, he let those burdens rest by the fire. Tonight was for remembrance and quiet gratitude. He listened to the soft breathing around him, the occasional crackle of a log shifting, the wind sighing through the eaves like an old lullaby. Astrid set aside her mending and rose to pour warm broth into wooden bowls. The steam carried the scent of herbs, and the simple meal brought a gentle comfort to tired minds and empty bellies. They ate slowly, savoring each spoonful in silence, each bite a small promise that life would carry on, that warmth and kinship would fill the spaces where grief had settled. After the bowls were cleared, Harold leaned back against the rough timber wall and closed his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he saw his father not on the pyre, but standing tall on the prow of his ship, wind in his hair, sea spray on his face, eyes set on distant shores. A soft smile touched Harold's lips. That was the memory he chose to hold tonight. Astrid spread fresh furs over the children and sat close beside Harold, resting her head on his shoulder. Neither spoke. There was no need. Outside, the wind softened and the longhouse seemed to breathe with them, alive with warmth and quiet love. Somewhere beyond the village, the sea lapped gently at the shore. Waves rolled in slow, steady rhythms, carrying away sorrow and bringing back a hush of peace. The sky above glittered with stars, each one a story waiting to be told around future fires. In that calm, in that stillness, the family drifted toward sleep, their hearts a little lighter than before. They would wake to new challenges, new days, and new tales, but tonight, under the watchful eyes of ancestors and gods alike, they found rest in each other, safe within the wooden walls that had sheltered their family for generations. And so, in the quiet heart of the Viking village, a new chapter began, not in battles or roaring feasts, but in the gentle warmth of those left behind, promising to carry the stories forward, one peaceful breath at a time. Dawn came quietly to the fjord. Pale light slipped through the cracks of the longhouse, touching rough beams and resting on sleeping faces. Outside, the last embers of the funeral pyre had cooled to soft gray ash, carried away by the morning breeze toward the sea. A new day had begun, but the world seemed in no hurry to greet it. Inside, the family stirred one by one. Harold woke to the sound of gentle voices and the smell of fresh bread warming over the hearth. He sat up, shoulders stiff from a night spent leaning against the timber wall, but there was a calm strength in his chest. The heaviness of loss had not vanished, but it had settled, like stones laid carefully at the bottom of a deep fjord. Astrid moved about the longhouse with quiet steps, folding furs, tending the small flame in the hearth, brushing sleep from the children's hair. Her hands were steady, her eyes bright despite the fatigue that clung to them. For her, caring for others was not duty but devotion, the heartbeat that kept the family whole. Outside, the village slowly returned to its daily rhythm. Smoke rose from other hearths as neighbors prepared their morning meals. Along the shore, fishermen pushed boats into the calm water, their oars dipping silently into the misty fjord. Chickens clucked in the yard, and the old hound, faithful through the night, stretched and yawned before settling again at the door. Harold stepped outside, pulling his cloak tighter against the lingering chill. He looked out at the fjord, at the snow-dusted peaks beyond, and let the cold air wake him fully. Each breath tasted of salt and pine, reminders that his father's world was now his to protect. He could almost hear the echo of his father's voice on the wind. "Stand firm, lead well, honor your kin." Turning back inside, Harold found Astrid waiting with a wooden cup of warm mead. She pressed it into his hands and held his gaze for a moment. No words, just the unspoken bond that they would face all that came together. Freya, the seer, sat cross-legged by the hearth, her eyes half closed as she traced runes into the ashes with a slender stick. Her murmured prayers mixed with the crackle of the small flame. Though her voice was too soft to catch, its gentle tone comforted everyone in earshot, like a cradle song for grown hearts. A quiet knock sounded at the door. Harold opened it to find Eirik, one of the clan's oldest warriors, standing with snow on his shoulders and a respectful nod. He spoke softly of new duties, ships needing repair, stores to be restocked, alliances to renew in coming moons. Life moved forward, even when grief lingered. Harold listened, nodding, feeling the truth of each word settle into his bones. As the morning wore on, neighbors came to the longhouse. Some brought baskets of smoked fish, dried herbs, or carved trinkets. Simple gifts to remind the family they did not stand alone. They spoke in hushed tones, offering memories of the old chieftain, tales of hunts, harsh winters survived, harvest feasts where laughter warmed the darkest nights. Children peeked from behind their mothers' cloaks, wide-eyed at the solemn gathering, but soon coaxed into shy smiles by Astrid's gentle touch or a warm piece of fresh bread slipped into small hands. In these tiny moments, life's quiet resilience shone brightest. When the visitors departed, Harold sat again by the hearth. He traced his fingers over the carved armrest of his father's old chair, feeling each notch and groove, a map of years, battles, laughter, lessons. He knew the weight of that seat was more than wood. It was every story, every sacrifice, every promise made and kept. Freya's voice rose softly behind him, telling the children tales of the world beyond the village, of ravens who carried secrets to Odin, of vast seas that hid treasures and monsters alike. The children leaned in, eyes wide, the troubles of the past day slipping away like melting snow. Outside, the sun climbed higher, melting frost from the roof beams. Chickens clucked louder, and the old hound barked at a passing raven. The fjord lay still and bright, a mirror to the sky. Within the longhouse, warmth and quiet hope mingled with the smell of fresh bread and the soft hum of family voices. The day would bring tasks, small burdens, and big choices, but for now they sat close together, breathing in the calm, a reminder that even in the hush of loss, life's gentle pulse carried on, steady as the tide. The days that followed moved slowly, like the drifting fog over the fjord. Each dawn brought new tasks, yet the quiet weight of the old chieftain's passing lingered in the timber beams and hearth embers. Still, life pressed forward, patient and gentle as the tide. Inside the longhouse, Astrid's steady hands wove new linen from flax, her fingers moving in practiced rhythm as she sat by the small hearth. Nearby, the children helped in their small ways, twisting yarn, fetching fresh water, giggling when the youngest tumbled over his own feet. Their laughter softened the heavy air, weaving tiny sparks of hope into the day. Outside, Harold worked alongside the other men of the village. Together they patched sails torn by winter winds, checked the hulls of long ships pulled onto the rocky shore. Each scrape of wood and tap of hammer reminded Harold that the clan's strength lay not just in weapons, but in hands that built and mended season after season. When the sun dipped low, the villagers gathered driftwood and dried branches for the hearth. In the evenings, they sat shoulder to shoulder around the warmth, voices low, sharing stories of the old chieftain's youth, how he had once crossed the sea to foreign shores, traded amber for silver, fought off raiders who came under the pale light of a midnight sun. Freya, the seer, was always near the hearth. Her voice wove new tales each night, like soft thread through worn cloth. She spoke of Yggdrasil, the great tree at the heart of all realms, whose roots reached into dark secrets and whose branches touched the realm of the gods. The children listened wide-eyed, heads resting on their mothers' laps, drifting closer to dreams with each whispered word. Sometimes Harold would step outside alone, standing at the edge of the village where pine trees leaned heavy with old snow. He would watch the stars appear one by one, cold sparks in the vast dark. He felt his father's spirit in the hush of the forest, in the low call of an owl perched unseen among the branches. When he returned inside, the warmth welcomed him home. Astrid would greet him with a soft look, offering bread dipped in honey or a cup of warm mead. She knew without words when the weight in his chest felt too heavy, when the memory of the pyre burned fresh again. In those moments she would rest her hand over his and remind him that no leader ever stood alone. One night, the villagers held a small feast to honor the turning of the season. They roasted fish caught from the fjord and baked flatbread on hot stones. Children ran between benches with sticky fingers and bright smiles. Old Eirik, the warrior with hair like frost, lifted his cup and spoke of the clan's resilience, of winters survived and harvests that always came again. Laughter rose to the rafters, echoing softly before falling quiet again. In the hush that followed, Harold looked around at his people, neighbors, kin, the old, the young, the ones who would stand beside him in calm and storm alike. He felt the weight of the chieftain's chair once more, but this time it settled differently, not a burden, but a promise. As the feast ended, Freya stood and traced slow runes in the ashes of the fire. Her eyes closed, lips moving in a chant too old for many to understand fully, yet the sound soothed the gathering, like a lullaby meant not for children, but for grown hearts, too restless to sleep. When the embers glowed low, the villagers drifted back to their own homes, guiding sleepy children by the hand. Harold lingered by the hearth, watching the last sparks dance and fade. He thought of voyages yet to come, storms yet to weather, but found comfort in knowing that within these walls, warm with stories, strong with kin, the future waited, patient and bright. Outside, the fjord lay still under a blanket of moonlight. The waves lapped gently at the shore, whispering secrets only the night could keep. And within the longhouse, the family slept, safe in the hush of dreams and the soft promise of another dawn. Days turned into weeks, and though the raw ache of loss softened, the echo of the old chieftain's presence remained in every corner of the longhouse. Each plank and beam seemed to hum with memory, the echo of footsteps, the low murmur of advice once given, the gentle creak of the chieftain's chair as he leaned forward to share his thoughts by the hearth. Harold rose before dawn each day, stepping into the cold hush that wrapped the village in blue mist. He watched the fjord breathe with the tide, its surface rippling like woven silk under the pale morning light. These quiet moments reminded him that he too was part of something larger, bound to the sea, the forest, and the people who looked to him now for calm and courage. Inside, Astrid kept the home alive with warmth and soft laughter. Her hands never stopped, spinning wool, mending cloaks worn thin from winter winds, guiding the children's small hands as they learned to shape clay and carve simple runes into driftwood. She was the gentle anchor that held the longhouse steady, even when storms gathered in the distance. One evening, a messenger arrived, a lone rider wrapped in a fur cloak, his horse steaming in the chill. He brought word of traders seeking safe passage through the clan's waters, and rumors of rival chieftains eyeing the fjord's sheltered inlets. The world beyond the village stirred, reminding Harold that the peace of their valley was never taken for granted. It was built, stone by stone, trust by trust. After the messenger departed, Harold sat by the hearth, tracing the carved runes on his father's old drinking horn. He turned the smooth wood in his hands, remembering the deep voice that once called out to clans gathered around roaring fires, telling them of voyages, alliances forged, battles won, and wounds carried home with pride. Freya, the seer, watched him from her place by the coals. She said little, but when she spoke, her words were like drops of water on ancient stone. The tide brings strangers and storms alike. Stand steady, listen well, trust the roots that hold you here. Harold nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into the marrow of his bones. The children, ever curious, sat close to Freya that night. She told them tales of ancient gods and hidden realms, of Thor's hammer crashing through storm clouds, of Freya's cloak of falcon feathers that could carry her between worlds. Each word painted the walls of the longhouse with scenes of wonder, weaving dreams that lingered long after the embers dimmed. Later, when the children drifted off to sleep, Harold and Astrid stepped outside. The air was crisp, scented with pine and the faint salt of the sea. Above, the night sky stretched endless and full of promise. Stars gleamed like watchful eyes, cold and bright against the dark. They stood together in silence. No grand words were needed, just the quiet strength of shared burdens and shared hopes. Astrid's hand found Harold's, fingers brushing over the scars earned from hunts, voyages, and harsh winters survived. In that touch was a vow that whatever storms the messenger's news might bring, they would face them as one. Inside, the old hound stirred in his sleep, dreaming of warm fires and scraps of salted fish. The hearth crackled, throwing gentle shadows across the worn benches and furs. Freya's low chant rose and fell like a lullaby for the walls themselves, keeping the past close and the night at bay. Outside, the fjord whispered under the moonlight. Waves lapped softly at the shore, as if to remind the village that even the sea, with all its hidden depths and faraway secrets, could be a friend when treated with respect. As the night deepened, Harold cast one last glance at the quiet village, at the smoke drifting lazily from neighboring hearths, at the snow-laden roofs that protected families dreaming inside. He felt the weight of his father's legacy not as a chain, but as a cloak, heavy, yes, but warm and earned. And so he turned back into the longhouse, drawing the heavy door closed behind him. The world outside could wait until morning. For now there was warmth, family, and the soft hush of sleep waiting just beyond the last crackle of the dying fire. Morning came softly, with pale light spilling through the gaps in the timber walls. The longhouse stirred awake as the first warmth of the sun touched the frost-tipped grass outside. Smoke rose in thin ribbons from the hearth, carrying the scent of fresh bread and simmering porridge to every corner of the room. Astrid moved quietly, careful not to wake the children still curled under furs. She stirred the pot with slow circles, watching steam rise and swirl. Every morning felt the same yet different, a small, steady promise that life continued, that their days would stretch out gently, one after another, no matter what storms might whisper at the edges. Outside, Harold stepped through the low doorway into the crisp dawn. His boots crunched over the frost as he made his way to the water's edge. The fjord lay like a sheet of polished iron, still and watchful under the waking sky. He breathed in the salt air, filling his lungs with the bracing cold. It reminded him that he was alive, that the weight he carried was part of a cycle older than any man could remember. He knelt by the shore, dipping his hands into the icy water. It stung his skin, but the chill sharpened his thoughts. He watched the ripples spread, carrying a piece of him into the vastness of the sea. Somewhere beyond that horizon, traders and raiders, allies and rivals, moved like drifting shadows. But here, in this quiet inlet, Harold felt grounded, bound to the earth and the people waiting behind the timber walls. When he returned inside, the children were awake, rubbing sleep from their eyes and yawning wide like bear cubs. Astrid greeted him with a bowl of warm porridge, sprinkled with dried berries she'd saved from last summer's harvest. They ate together in companionable silence, each mouthful a small ritual that tied them closer to the day ahead. After the meal, Harold gathered the men of the village by the boats drawn up on the rocky shore. The sun climbed higher, painting the waves in glints of gold. Nets were checked for tears, sails were unfurled to breathe the salt air after months bundled away. The rhythmic slap of water against hulls was soothing, the same song that had lulled his father before him, and his father's father before that. The elders sat nearby on driftwood benches, speaking in low voices about the messenger's news. Some worried about rival clans, others about the cost of keeping the fjords safe for traders. Harold listened more than he spoke, letting their words settle into him like stones dropped into deep water. He knew that his strength as a leader did not come from loud commands, but from quiet, steady decisions made in the hush between tides. By midday, the men's work was done. The children ran along the shore, chasing gulls that dipped and rose with the wind. Astrid called them back when the sky began to gray with drifting clouds. They gathered driftwood for the evening fire, small arms full of twisted branches and salt-bleached logs. As dusk fell, the clan returned to the longhouse. Shadows stretched long across the clearing, while the first stars blinked awake overhead. Inside, Freya tended the hearth, coaxing it to life until the room glowed with warmth. She placed herbs into the flames, releasing a soft, earthy scent that calmed restless minds and eased tired limbs. When all were settled, she began to speak, not of distant gods or fierce battles, but of the simple strength found in quiet places, a mother's hands weaving flax, a father's steady breath beside the cradle, the hush of snow falling outside when the world holds its breath. Her voice wove through the rafters like a soft cloak, wrapping each listener in calm. Harold leaned back, letting his eyes close for a moment. The flicker of the fire played across his face, casting him half in shadow, half in light. In his mind he saw the fjord under moonlight, the sturdy boats waiting for spring, the village safe and warm behind him. He knew storms would come, but for tonight they could rest. Beside him, Astrid's hand brushed his. The children's heads dipped against each other, drifting into dreams of summer meadows and hidden streams. The old hound thumped his tail once in his sleep, content under the warmth of the hearth. Outside, the night gathered softly around the longhouse, holding it like a secret. The waves whispered to the stones on the shore, telling stories no man could fully hear. And inside, where the embers glowed low and the clan dreamed together, the promise of dawn waited, patient and sure. The days grew longer as winter slowly loosened its grip. Snow melted in thin silver streams down the hillsides, carrying with it the memory of cold nights and fierce winds. The air changed too, softer, tinged with the promise of new shoots and distant birdsong. In the village, hope stirred alongside the thawing earth. Each morning Harold rose before the first bird broke the hush with its song. He walked through the village paths, boots pressing into damp soil where grass would soon push through. He greeted those who tended to early chores, the old woman shaking straw from the goat pen, the boy hauling fresh water from the well, his breath misting in the pale dawn. Each nod, each word, stitched him tighter to the lives he now sheltered. Inside the longhouse, Astrid swept the stone hearth clean and laid fresh rushes on the floor. Her movements were quiet and sure, like a gentle tide washing over the space. She hummed old songs she remembered from her own mother, simple verses about sunlit fields and safe returns from the sea. The children listened as they helped, their small hands clumsy but eager. Freya, the seer, watched it all from her corner by the hearth. She read signs in the drift of the smoke, the crackle of the logs, the faint shapes left by embers when the flames died down. To her the house spoke in ways no other could hear. Some nights she would wake Harold with a soft word, a warning, a blessing, or simply a reminder that what was meant to come would come in its own time. One afternoon, a sudden rain swept across the fjord. The wind rattled the wooden shutters, carrying the tang of salt and distant pine. Inside, the villagers gathered closer, sitting cross-legged on fur rugs. Freya spoke of the old ways, how the sea was a living thing with moods and secrets, how stones remembered footsteps long after they had passed. She spoke, too, of the importance of stories, how they wove the past to the present, tying each person to those who had come before. The children sat wide-eyed, tracing patterns in the fur as they listened to names of ancestors whose bones rested in burial mounds now covered in snowdrops and wild thyme. Harold listened, too. He found comfort in the hum of voices, the warmth pressed into the walls by people gathered together. He thought of his father's words, of the nights spent by the same fire, hearing tales that once felt distant but now lived through his own breath. When the rain passed, the clan stepped outside into the glistening calm. Droplets clung to branches like tiny jewels. The fjord was silver under the clearing sky, its surface rippling where the rain had kissed it. Children splashed through shallow puddles, squealing at the chill that bit their bare ankles. Harold stood by the water, feeling the damp air on his face. He thought of the traders who would soon sail these channels, of the new goods that would fill their storehouses, salt, fine cloth, iron tools from distant forges. But he also knew that with the ships came whispers and shadows, talk of shifting alliances, old grudges, ambitions that spread like moss over stone. He looked back at the village, at Astrid gathering the children inside for warm bread, at Freya standing in the doorway, her gaze fixed not on him, but on something far beyond the fjord's mouth. He felt both the weight and the blessing of the path he walked. The old chieftain's spirit lingered, not as a ghost, but as a steady flame inside him. That evening, as dusk deepened into velvet blue, the clan sat together by the crackling fire. They ate simple stew, the warmth of it chasing away the damp that clung to their boots and cloaks. Laughter rose in soft waves, stories told in low voices, children drifting off against their mothers' shoulders. When the last bowl was emptied and the fire settled into embers, Harold rose and stepped outside one final time. The fjord shimmered under the rising moon, each wave a gentle breath in the dark. He closed his eyes, listening to the night, the hush of water on stone, the distant cry of a lone seabird, the heartbeat of a village at rest. Inside, the longhouse waited for him, the warm hush of voices trailing into dreams, the promise that tomorrow would come with new light, new tasks, and the same ancient peace that wrapped the village like a woolen cloak. And so he returned, drawing the door shut behind him, leaving the restless world to the tide and the wind outside. In the gentle cradle of early spring, the village seemed to breathe with new life. Pale shoots of grass pushed through the thawing ground, and tender buds crowned the tips of bare branches. Dawn arrived earlier each day, soft light filtering through drifting mist that rose from the fjord like a whispered secret. Harold woke with the first hush of birdsong, his breath visible in the chill before the sun's warmth touched the earth. He slipped from his bed of fur and wool, careful not to wake Astrid, who still dreamed beside him. Outside, the world smelled of wet soil and pine sap, and somewhere far off, a woodpecker drummed its steady beat into an ancient tree. Near the village's edge, he found the blacksmith, old Rurik, already at work beneath a lean-to. Sparks danced in the dawn, tiny fireflies against the dull gray of the waking sky. Rurik's hammer fell in slow, sure rhythms, shaping iron into nails and rivets for the boats that would soon ride the fjord's thawed waters. They exchanged few words, just a nod of respect that spoke of years spent shoulder to shoulder. In the longhouse, Astrid rose to stir the hearth to life. She fed it kindling, coaxing bright flames from the ash, and soon the warm scent of porridge and flatbread drifted through the air. The children woke one by one, drawn by the promise of warmth and the comfort of familiar hands smoothing hair and wiping sleep from their eyes. Freya, the seer, moved silently among them, tying small bundles of dried herbs, muttering half-formed prayers into the knots. She tucked one behind Astrid's ear. "For good health," she said. Another she slipped into Harold's palm. "For safe journeys," spoken softly so only he could hear. These small gestures stitched the waking day to the dreams left behind. Later, the villagers gathered near the shore, where the boats lay ready to be mended and tarred. The smell of pitch mingled with the brine of the sea. Children played in the shallows, skipping stones across the calm surface, their laughter echoing against the rocky cliffs. The older ones carried baskets of dried fish to be traded when the first merchants arrived, their feet sinking into the damp sand. Harold oversaw it all with a quiet watchfulness. He knew every name, every task, every small worry that furrowed a brow or lingered behind an idle glance. He offered a hand here, a word there, never hurried but always moving. The old chieftain's wisdom guided him still, not as an echo but as a steady voice woven into his own. At midday, a soft rain fell, a thin veil that darkened the wooden beams and left silver beads clinging to every branch and roof. The villagers gathered under the longhouse eaves, the murmur of their voices blending with the patter of raindrops. Astrid handed out slices of fresh bread, warm from the hearth, spread with sweet butter and a spoonful of last summer's honey. Freya told quiet stories to the children at her feet, tales of the great tree Yggdrasil, whose roots drank deep from hidden wells, whose branches brushed the heavens. Her voice soothed them, even as their eyelids drooped in the soft hush of the rain. Harold watched them and felt, for a moment, that time had slowed to a gentle drift, like a boat rocking at anchor. When the rain passed, the air smelled clean and new. Small rivulets trickled between stones, carrying the rain's memory down to the waiting fjord. Harold walked the village path once more, passing the carved posts that marked the sacred grove. He paused, touching the rough wood where old runes were cut deep, prayers and names left by generations long returned to the earth. As dusk fell, the villagers gathered inside, drawn by the promise of warmth and one another's company. They ate simple fare by firelight, fish stew, bread and mugs of weak ale. The children drifted to sleep where they sat, heads resting on mothers' laps. The day's play and rain, soft air pulling them into dreams. Harold lingered by the doorway when the last log settled in the hearth. He looked out at the fjord, now dark and still beneath a sky spattered with quiet stars. He thought of the ships that would come, the new voices they would carry, and the old stories that would keep the village rooted no matter how far their people might roam. In that hush, he felt the weight of his promise to keep his people safe, to hold their memories close, to guide them through seasons just as harsh as they were gentle. He turned back inside, closing the door on the night's chill, and joined his people where dreams waited, wrapped in fur and firelight. A soft wind whispered through the long house that night, slipping in through tiny gaps in the timber walls, stirring the embers in the hearth just enough to make them glow. The gentle crackle of burning wood was the only sound, save for the slow, steady breathing of those who lay curled beneath woven blankets of wool and fur. Harold sat near the dying fire, watching the shadows flicker and dance across the beams overhead. Astrid slept beside him, her hand resting lightly against his knee, an anchor pulling him back from thoughts that wandered too far into the darkness. Outside, the fjord sighed against the shore, the tide shifting with an ancient rhythm that lulled the village to sleep. He rose quietly, careful not to wake her, and stepped outside into the crisp night. Stars glittered above like scattered runes carved into a velvet sky, each one telling a story older than any man could recall. He stood for a moment, breathing in the cold, feeling it settle deep in his chest, before letting it go in a slow exhale that seemed to carry his worries with it. Along the path that wound toward the sacred grove, the frost had begun to form, delicate threads of white that curled around each blade of grass and branch, catching the moonlight. Harold's footsteps were soft against the earth, muffled by the hush that blanketed the world when most were asleep. At the grove's edge, he paused beside the great oak tree. Its trunk was wide enough that it would take 3 men to encircle it, its bark thick and rough beneath his palm. He traced the runes carved there long ago, offerings and prayers from fathers and mothers who had come here before him, asking for safe passage, good harvests, healthy sons and daughters. He whispered his own promise to the tree, letting the ancient branches carry his words skyward. He thanked the gods for the day's quiet mercies, the soft rain, the laughter of children, the warmth of the hearth. He asked for strength for tomorrow's work, for clear skies when the boats set sail, for the safety of those he loved more than his own breath. As he turned to leave, he heard a rustle in the underbrush, a soft, careful sound that drew him still. From the darkness emerged Freya, the old seer, wrapped in a cloak of fox fur that brushed the ground as she walked. Her eyes, clear and bright even in the shadows, met his without surprise. "Can't sleep?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. Harold shook his head, offering her a quiet smile. "Too much in here," he said, tapping his temple. Freya stepped closer and rested a hand on his arm. Her fingers were cold, but her touch brought a strange warmth, like a hearth fire catching a new flame. "Then let it go," she said softly. "The night is long enough to carry your burdens for you." Together they stood in silence, listening to the leaves stir in the breeze, feeling the quiet press in around them like a comforting blanket. The moon slipped behind a drifting cloud, silver shadows shifting over the forest floor, as if the earth itself was breathing with them. When she finally spoke again, her words were like a thread sewing the waking world to the dream. "Sleep, Harold," she said. "Dream of calm seas and green fields. Dream of your people strong and safe. Dream of fires that never go out." He nodded, feeling the heaviness in his shoulders loosen, his thoughts softening like embers cooling in ash. Together they walked back toward the village, the path lit by moonlight and the quiet glow of their shared hope. Behind them, the grove stood watch, ancient branches swaying gently as if in blessing. Inside the longhouse, the air was warm with breath and fire. Astrid stirred as he returned to her side, her hand finding his beneath the blanket. He lay down beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, the steady heartbeat of the life they'd built together. Outside, the fjord's waves kissed the shore in a lullaby older than any words. Within the wooden walls, dreams unfurled like sails catching a gentle wind, carrying Harold and his people ever onward, through the night, through the seasons, through the quiet promise of another dawn. The first light of dawn brushed softly across the horizon, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold. The village still lay wrapped in quiet slumber, the longhouse's wooden beams glowing warmly as the hearth's last embers faded into soft ash. Harold awoke slowly, the calmness of night still resting on his spirit like a protective cloak. Outside, the air was cool but inviting, filled with the delicate scent of blooming wildflowers and damp earth. The fjord's waters shimmered under the early sun, reflecting the vast sky like a mirror of glass. Birds began to sing their morning songs, their melodies weaving through the trees and across the fields. Harold rose from his bed, careful not to disturb Astrid, who still dreamed beside him. He stepped outside, feeling the gentle warmth of sunlight on his face. The village was stirring, smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the soft murmur of voices floated on the breeze as neighbors greeted one another, ready to face the day. He walked slowly to the shore, where the long boats rested, their hulls glistening from the morning dew. The men and women gathered there, their faces bright with determination and hope. Some prepared nets, others checked sails, while children ran along the pebbled beach, their laughter ringing like a joyful song. Harold watched them, his heart full. He thought of the long journey his people had traveled, the hardships endured, and the strength that bound them together. He saw not just a village, but a family, woven tightly by stories, by courage, and by love. As the sun rose higher, the warmth spread through the land, awakening every leaf, every blade of grass, every stone warmed by countless seasons of life. Harold felt the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet, a reminder that they were part of something eternal. He turned back toward the village where Astrid awaited, her smile like the soft light of the dawn. Together they walked beneath the towering oaks and whispering pines, feeling the embrace of the forest that had sheltered their ancestors. In the days to come, the boats would sail far beyond the fjord's edge, carrying their hopes on waves as endless as the sky. But no matter how distant the voyage, the stories would return, carried in song and memory, in the quiet moments by the fire, in the dreams that held them all. And so the village lived on, nestled between earth and sea, caught in the gentle rhythm of seasons turning, hearts beating, and lives unfolding, quiet, enduring, and full of peace. As you settle into your own quiet space tonight, remember that just like Harold and his people, you too are part of a great story, a story of courage, of rest, and of calm. Let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, and the gentle tide of sleep carry you onward. Sleep well, and when morning comes, may you wake refreshed, ready for the new day's promise.